Hello, you beautiful degenerates, and welcome to Links and Locks, the Action Network's golf betting podcast presented by Bet365. I'm your host, Roberto Arguello, and I'm excited to join you this week to break down the Zurich Classic of New Orleans. This week, I'm joined by Spencer Aguiar. You can find him at Tee Off Sports. Spencer, great to be with you this week.
Roberto, it's always a pleasure to do this with you, man.
This is the only two-man team event on the PGA Tour. The QBE Shootout, not an official PGA Tour event, so we're not going to acknowledge that this week in our two-man team prior results. But this week, we've got a rare occurrence in the PGA Tour where the favorite to win outright, Xander Schauffele and Patrick Cantlay, is around plus 300 in the market, significantly shorter than we've seen anyone to win a tournament this calendar year on the PGA Tour, although next week in Mexico at the Mexico Open at Vidanta, I assume Jon Rahm is going to be very short. I've already seen him around 300, plus 300 as well. So with the heavy favorites in the field this week, a lot of people are betting them. But before we get into our outright bets, what is your best bet for the week?
So my best bet for this tournament will be Robbie Shelton and Lee Hodges, 33rd or better. That is on Bet365. That's a minus 120 wager. And I'm going with this for a couple of reasons. I think when you look at their profile, it yields this super clean return that at least my model thinks should be about minus 180 to make the cut. We might get caught in a situation where they make the cut and finish outside that position, but the fact that Bet365 pays these wagers out in full does give us a decent edge to consider this wager. I have the two of them ranked as the 7th team in weighted tee to green and then 12th for weighted proximity. So I think for this tournament, like you kind of said it best, Roberto, we're looking at a board here where I think having two quality golfers, or at least two players that fit really well together, is going to go a long way. The Xander Cantlay team, that's about as strong as you can get for a pairing. I would say that, I mean, I think if you looked at any matchup, and we've seen this in Ryder Cups and President's Cup, you throw those two together, they kind of have the same style. So it works in alternate shot. It works in four ball. It's kind of like the perfect mix for them with it. But it's a really difficult tournament for that reason. And we can get into all the metrics of why it's a problem on the back end of the equation here. But it's going to be one of those events where I just try to sprinkle in some wagers, try to find any value that I can. But it's one of those boards that doesn't make it the easiest to do that.
So you mentioned part of the format for this week. So Thursday and Saturday are going to be four ball, which is where each partner in the group plays his own ball through the hole. And if the best ball is the score that the team takes. So it's better known as best ball, but also known as four ball. And then on Friday and Sunday, it will play foursomes, which is better known as alternate shot. So a little bit more of strategy involved there because there are four par threes on this course, and all of them are over 200 yards. So three of the six toughest holes historically there. And then also, if you want to figure out the par fives, you've got a guy who's longer than the other one. There is some game theory involved to planning out who tees off on which holes. But before we get into more picks this week, Spencer, would you like to break down the course here at TPC Louisiana?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of said it best with this format. Like, more so than anything, that's going to be the most important thing to look at, because when you look at the alternate shot format of this, it's going to be one of those situations where teams are going to have to try to find the I guess the preferred route would be the best way to say it, of how they want to do it. And you said, like, there's really long par threes. There's golfers that are going to be in better positions, whether that be with the iron in hand or off the tee. So I think that's one of the ways that you can really find an advantage. The other thing that I looked at when I ran a model, and I think it's important to say just in general. So when I put this together, I took both players and I turned them into as if they were one golfer. There are some negative things to be said about that, because I don't know if that's like the preferred way, but when you have a wonky distribution set of data to begin with, a percentage went into that. And then I also looked to where if one person started the hole, how does the next person perform on the next shot? How does the next person perform on that next shot? So I think that that's going to be the key here. Obviously we have 82-man teams. The top 33 in ties are going to be the ones that make the weekend. That's kind of what I was going into it about with the Shelton play there, because it doesn't mean just because they make the cut that bet's going to win. But I think it at least leaves us in a good position to where whatever we think the ties are there, the fact that Bet365 pays everything out in full is at least a positive situation on that finishing position market. But as far as the course goes, I think you're going to have a lot of long iron proximities here. We're looking at nearly 30%. It's just marginally below 30% of the second shots come from over 200 yards. That's a really big percentage. You kind of see a decrease everywhere and then that massive increase there. I think it's a ball striker's course at the end of the day, but it's kind of hard to look at this in your prototypical sense, just because like when you can play your own ball on Thursday and Saturday, like to me, that screams more birdie or better percentage and guys that are going to be able to score. Like some of those downside qualities are actually not as big of a negative if you have a partner that can kind of bail you out there. So I'm trying to find two golfers that can make birdies on the Thursday and Saturday rounds, and then golfers on Friday and Sunday that can put that merger together of, maybe like, I think a really good example of that, and this kind of takes us into an outright card here in a second. I think when you look at the Kurt Kitayama team and Taylor Montgomery, you have one end with Montgomery, who's going to be probably the premier putter or one of the premier putters in this event. Like him and Denny McCarthy are the two golfers for me that are the 1 and 2 golfers in putting. And then when you look at the long iron proximity, like if you can give me that second end of the equation where those guys can do that, that's going to go a long way. And then on the flip side of it, I also seem to like this Sung Jae Keith Mitchell pairing of what they can provide. And that's kind of just two quality ball strikers, two guys that are great off the tee. And let's see if they have the same skill set where they can find an advantage that way. So it's a lot of strategy, as you can tell with this answer. Like there's not a prototypical way to try to play this, whether that be from the teams themselves or trying to handicap a model from this. And, sometimes when that's the end game here, I do think you can get an edge with the way that you build it. But I will say, Roberto, like it's the answer I've given a lot of these weeks. Pricing is very stingy would be the word I want to use, just across the board at all these places. And you don't have to look any further than, as you said, Xander and Patrick Cantlay are 3-1 to win this event. And then on top of it, you also have sub 10-1 on Homa and Morikawa. We have numbers that are between 12-14-1 on Sung Jae and Keith Mitchell. So there's a lot of baked in value that gets lost when prices become that.
You mentioned Sung Jae Im and Keith Mitchell. They're going to be on feature groups on String 3 on PGA Tour Live this week, which I'm on. So that's why I'm not giving out any picks this week. But Spencer, that doesn't mean you can't give out your picks this week. You have a full outright card this week, and who's on it?
Yeah, so I typically like these change of pace events because of the edge that it increases. It's kind of what I was talking about. We can talk about the large hold percentage and all those situations that come into play, but I decided to change my card. So I usually bet to win 8 units on a typical tournament. I decided to bet to win 5 units for these outrights. I don't necessarily want to get caught in this larger exposure of having to go to the top of the board in a reduced field like this. So you might be able to find better than this if you search around, but I took Sung Jae Im and Keith Mitchell at 13-1. There was only 3 teams in my model that graded inside the top 15 when combining their totals in all 4 critical strokes gain metrics. They would be team number 1. Team number 2 would be Cantlay and Schauffele. And then team number 3 would be Kitayama and Montgomery. For that reason, I decided to bet Kitayama and Montgomery at 25-1. Roberto, this is a UNLV pairing that hits home for me. It's not the reason why I'm picking them, obviously, but I think they possess that intriguing skill set that I was just talking about, where one player is going to give you the long iron ability, the other one's going to be able to make the putts. And then when you add this volatile mix that they bring to the table, I think that birdie or better percentage has a chance to play exceptionally well here in 4-ball action for them. So I'm going to take a chance that they're just a really good pairing together. I think 25 is about like, to me, 23-1 was the proper number I had. So I wouldn't go too much lower than that if you can't find that number in the space, but it kind of goes with what I'm saying, that we have a difficult betting board at the end of the day. I grabbed Taylor Moore and Matthew Neesmith at 55-1. I think Moore's recent form, if we're talking about recent form here, he's producing as if he's a top 15 golfer in this field for me. I think that he's longer off the tee than Neesmith. I think he generates more birdies than Neesmith, but I think when you add these two together, you get a really good format from them in both of these styles that we're looking for here. And then I wrapped my card up with Brendan Todd and Patton Kizzire at 90 to 1. I think it just keeps going back to what I'm saying. Like, Kazaire's boomer bust nature works really well in four ball. And then when they match up together for alternate shot, there's probably some volatility. Sure, they have a lot of miscut potential. You don't need to look any further than them being 90 to 1 at the end of the day. But that's the type of wager that I'm looking for. Like, they're 11th in my model when I ran them from a team perspective. And like, that's one of the big important things to me is I ranked all teams from top to bottom with this. I was trying to figure out where the edges were. And when I see it, when a combination like Todd and Kizzire, where my model seems to like Brendan Todd week in and week out, like I've kind of talked about him on this show, that I think 2023 has been a really solid year from him from start to finish. When I run only 2023 data, he's been skyrocketing up all these boards. But Patton Kizzire is not necessarily a golfer that grades extremely well for me every single week. So when I added the two of them together and I saw the faults on one end were propelled by the others, upside that they had, and then vice versa on that equation. It's one of those things where sure, they could implode, come in last place, miss the cut. But if I'm shooting for maximum, I guess, upside for an outright wager, I always am willing to take those risks. And you're never going to have, especially in this sort of a field, like the profile's never going to be clean on a 90 to 1 shot. And I would rather bet on that upside, specifically when we're talking about Xander and Patrick Cantlay being in this event. You're going to need your best because that team's the favorite for a reason. And, I talked to Nick a little bit about this off air, and I don't know how Nick played his card, and I don't know how Nick would have played his card if we were on here, but I know from talking to him, he thinks that Schauffele-Cantlay combination is the team to beat. And, it goes without saying that they definitely are. And you could make the argument that any wager that you put in from an outright perspective kind of does run a risk here. So that's one of the main reasons beyond anything else that I decided to limit this to where, it ends up being essentially 0.6 units to win 5. And it's a very little card that I can put together and get some fun action on this, where I do think I have an edge in a couple of these spots from a long-term perspective.
I'll touch on your picks in a moment, but wanted to add in that Nick texted us. He said that he's betting Burns and Horschel to win this week. He said they were the best pair in alternate shot last year, other than Ryder and Redmond. So alternate shot, the tougher format, you'll see guys in the best ball format on Thursday and Saturday go really low, like 13, 15 under par sometimes. But alternate shot, sometimes teams will just play even par. And so if you can go low on that round, you get 5, 6 under par. That's a big boost to you and an advantage over the field. Burns and Horschel, Burns coming in already with the win a few weeks ago at the Dell match play. Billy Horschel really been struggling lately, not hitting the ball that great. But we know that this type of match play format, it's not match play this week, so I shouldn't say that, but this type of team golf format brings out the best in him. And we know that he's going to be talking to Burns the whole time. Sam Burns, fan favorite down there in Louisiana as well. Obviously a product of LSU. Also, the last time Nick missed the show, I was also doing PGA Tour Live, so I wasn't allowed to give picks. He also texted us that he was betting on Sam Burns. And wouldn't you know, Sam Burns won that tournament at the match play. So can Nick go 2 for 2 from off of the podcast? That remains to be seen. Spencer, I'm intrigued by a lot of your picks here. You had some kind of a theme of having one player who is playing great golf right now, like a Taylor Moore, a Sung J M, and then having another player who has some upside, but isn't necessarily playing at their best, like a Keith Mitchell, for example. And then also I'm very intrigued by the Kurt Kitayama and Taylor Montgomery pair, because Montgomery is the guy who can really bomb it out there. And if he's not in the water this week, the rough's not very penal. The fairways are pretty wide. He can set up a Kitayama second shot, and then Taylor Moore, one of the better putters, as you alluded to, could roll it in. I think that's a winning strategy. Putting always plays. And Kitayama's got everything in his bag. So I'm very intrigued by that team. They will also be on feature group 3 or on stream 3 in our feature group. So you can catch that. Spencer will be tuning in as well on ESPN Plus. I'm intrigued by this card this week. If I was betting it, I would obviously not be betting Cantlay and Schauffele, but I'd be betting on some of these upside plays. Obviously, Taylor Moore playing incredible golf. We hit on him at the Valspar, and any course where you're going to need to hit long irons is going to be right up his wheelhouse. He's just a really strong player, and he's not necessarily a household name, even though he has one on the PGA Tour right now, but his game speaks louder than he does. And I'm just a huge fan of his. I think that he continues to have value betting week in and week out.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. And like, to me, that's one of the preferred ways to play this is find the golfer that you trust, that you think has that upside. Like a Taylor Moore for me, as I talked about, he's a top 15 player for me in this field, of the entire field of every single player, if it was an individual event. Find me a player that I think has upside with him. The same answer I could give with Brendan Todd.
Mhm.
And I do want to say, like, it's interesting with Nick's play of Horschel and Burns. I've done a lot of shows with Nick over, 2 years now. I have not heard Nick give Sam Burns on any show ever, other than the ones he doesn't make it on. So there may be something about that. Maybe Vegas has given the call that you can't come on Action Network. You can't give this pick to everybody. So he may know a little inside information there. But I will say this about the play. Like, when I rank this from a team perspective, and I'll just run through my top five so we don't go through every single one. But number one for me, Cantlay and Schauffele. Number two, Keith Mitchell and Sungjae Im. Number three, Max Homa, Colin Morikawa. That number 14 for me would be Billy Horschel and Sam Burns. And then five would be Siwoo Kim and Tom Kim. So I think that's a very, like, for as weird as I ran a model this week, I think it's a very prototypical expected top five that you would project to have come into play with this. So I think Burns and Horschel have proven before at this event that this is a really good fit for them. And if somebody's going to challenge Schauffele and Cantlay, they're certainly one of the duos that can do it.
You can find Burns and Horschel in the enhanced win market at Bet365 at 15-1. They came in second here last year, and they tied what was previously the tournament record for the two-man team event. This is only the sixth year that it's been played this year. So 5 tournaments that they went back on, and they shot 27, which was the best. But unfortunately, Patrick Cantlay and Xander Schauffele shattered the record and got to 29 under par to win the tournament last year. Before we get into any further picks this week, as a reminder, the Links and Locks podcast is proudly presented by Bet365, the world's favorite sportsbook brand. Sign up with promo code ACTION, that's ACTION, to get Bet365's exclusive sign-up offer. Bet $1 on any game and get $200 in bonus bets. Must be 21 or older. Offer is available in Colorado, New Jersey, Ohio, and Virginia in the U.S. Gambling problem? Call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. Spencer, we touched on your outright card. Let's get into your bread and butter, the matchup bets, who you got this week, and more importantly, who are you fading this week in your matchup?
It's funny, Roberto, because I keep talking about this tournament of trying to find two players that are going to provide at least some sort of a combination. And I guess, like, from an upside perspective, I'm trying to find that boomer bust end with like a Taylor Moore and all those routes that I'm going. And I think from a head-to-head perspective, you always want the safety route with it over anything else. And it's a weird card because, like, there's a lot we can say from a value perspective, and these odds not being what I want them to be in the head-to-head market and all those answers with it. But I decided to take a little bit of a different route here. So because there's only 80 teams, top 33 and times ties end up making it into the weekend, I decided to try to find the team that, yes, I was going to fade. That's the number one answer here above anything else. That doesn't change whatsoever. But I did it with a combination of golfers here where I think these are two boomer bust golfers being on the same team here. So it's going to provide one of those, volatile boomer bust natures of a head-to-head wager. I just think we're getting value here. And so the wager from me is Tom Hoge and Harris English, minus 120 over Højgaard and Olesen. For me, Højgaard and Olesen are just two golfers that have even a broader range of outcomes than we're talking about with Hoge and English. I know that the recent consistency from Hoge and English will leave a ton to be desired, but it's also generated this value inflated opportunity, at least by my math, to grab a team that does rank inside the top 10 of my model for expected production. There wasn't a category that I ran where the two graded outside of the top 22 of this field as a team. And there's an argument to be made that they actually work better together than they do as individuals right now. I know that's an extremely weird comment to give, but I kept trying to find similarities and unique combinations that would turn any team into a star-studded pairing. And I highly considered betting these two as an outright bet. I ended up not going that route at the end of the day just because I'm only betting to win 5 units to begin with. I don't want to overexpose the card. I really kind of like this pairing for what it was. Like, it's going to be hard to find value, and it's going to be the most volatile tournament that we have talked about in any regard. Like, at least when we talked about the match play, it was golfer versus golfer, and it was a daily perspective to when I released a head-to-head matchup. I felt confident that this guy's intangibles on that particular golf course would equate to a better chance for victory according to what the odds were giving us at that time. I can't say this is necessarily the case. Like, there's so much that can go wrong in a team format here. And I want to preface it by saying that, like, there's only so much of an edge that you can actually have. But, like, the biggest fade for me would be that Højgaard and Olesen team. And some of that can be said just, I don't have a ton of European data. That's always going to be a reason. I know that about my model, and that always worries me. My model does like Højgaard, and I have enough from Olesen's past of him playing here. And the problem is these are past results from years ago that I'm running. So it's kind of difficult to find out exactly where you're at. But more so than anything, like this Hoagie and English pairing, for all those top 22s that they bring to the table inside of my model, it's an intriguing price for, I think if you had both of these guys, and maybe even if we're just talking about Hoagie here, Roberto, like if we could go back to him 2 months ago, rather than this like miscut spree that he's been on, I'd like to think that alone he could have made this a team that probably from an outright perspective would have been more in that like 20-1 range than this like over 30-1 price. So I just think we're getting a really nice reduction, or inflation, I should say, in this situation, to where like the public has reduced their viewpoint of what kind of upside they actually bring to the table. So it's once again, very volatile pairing. Both of them are going to be volatile, but I just love the approach play that kind of as a team that they bring to the table. And then the tee to green metrics are kind of top notch for me here.
Those two definitely have upside. Tom Hoagie and Harris English, guys who've won on the PGA Tour before against guys who haven't won on the PGA Tour before. And also just so that everybody makes sure, so that everybody's on the same page. The Højgaard you're mentioning is Nicolai Højgaard, who just got special temporary status on the PGA Tour. His brother Rasmus, his twin brother Rasmus, is one of the favorites this week. I believe he's a co-favorite at the ISPS Handa Open over on the DP World Tour. Olesen, player who hasn't played in a professional event since February, but he has had a run of strong play. Unfortunately, there's no data on that. So just a lot of unknowns there, but just looking at it to pan out and from a wider view, Hoagie and English are better players. They've been better players for a while. Olesen and more specifically Højgaard have upside, but I think the floor is significantly higher for English and Hoagie, and their form isn't great right now. The other players' form is decent, but you're getting a discount on this and maybe getting guys whom you wouldn't get matched up against Hoagie and English in a matchup very often. So I like the chance of taking a buy low spot. And obviously Hoagie and English have a lot more experience in these type of competitions. English was on a Ryder Cup team also. So he's got experience in this team competition as well. Hoagie, a player who could potentially be on one of those teams. We know that Will Zalatoris being out for the year means that one of those spots is up for grabs for the Americans as well. In addition to your matchup bet, what other bets do you have outside of your outright, your top 33 bet, and this matchup?
So that's my card this week.
All right.
You know, and I think you said it best there, Roberto. It's like Nicolai Højgaard is a really, and same with his brother. I mean, I can give the answer about both of them. They're extremely talented golfers that, like, it would not shock me if Nicolai Højgaard ends up with this temporary membership, really making a name for himself on tour and turning that into a permanent stay if that's the route he decides he wants to go, and he wants to be a primary PGA Tour player versus playing in Europe here. I don't know what the answer is for him. I haven't heard him give that response. And I just think at the end of the day, it comes down to all the unknowns that, I mean, Olesen for the past, like, if we backtrack this 3 years ago, 4 years ago, Olesen was a supremely talented guy in the same exact position. He's had some trouble. He's had some situations. that have just not gone right for him in different sectors of the world. Like, we don't need to talk about some of those situations here. I just think that the unknowns are what makes this such a intriguing head-to-head wager, because it's not to say that Højgaard and Olesen can't top 5 this tournament. That is certainly within the range of outcomes that can come into play. But in the same breath of that, if we're talking about a head-to-head wager, I would rather take more of the known commodities that we have in English and Hoagie, and I would rather try to take on this boom or bust profile to where, yeah, if they come in 4th place, Højgaard and Olesen, and they beat me, it's a head-to-head wager. I will lose my 1.2 units to win one, and I will move forward into the next tournament. But that miscut potential does come into play for me. And while Hoagie and his partner have this here, I don't know if it's necessarily like English has looked good somewhat recently. Like, I know we've talked about him a lot on this show, and there's been miscuts that have been thrown into the mix, but I think he's popping here and there. Like, it's not the English that we were talking about 6 months ago, where he was just missing every single cut over and over again. And you could make that argument that, yeah, Hoagie's gone in the wrong direction here with his game, but from a approach metric standpoint, like, he's the number 2 player in my model in 2023 for strokes gained approach. That means something to me when I'm running this, specifically in a team event where he's going to be able to give his partner better looks. And, maybe that's all he needs. Like, if he's not the one putting it, and English can just use somebody else's ball when we talk about alternate shot, or the pressure is taken away now all of a sudden when you're talking about this 4-ball format, to where maybe, like, the boom or bust nature that we're talking about with these players, like, if all of a sudden, yeah, English or Hoagie, we can go either one of them is prone to like have a triple bogey, well, all of a sudden it doesn't matter as much if like his partner can make a birdie here. So there's a lot of ways, like, yeah, there's the boom or bust nature that comes more into play, an alternate shot, but the same answer can be given. Every single team has that problem. And really the only two that, or maybe, I guess the 2 teams to me that at least are the most similar would be Cantlay and Schauffele. And I do kind of tend to think that Sungjae and Mitchell are more similar than they're not in some ways. And that just comes down to a ball striking answer. But like, even if you look at Homa and Morikawa, and that could be a good thing to winning this tournament, there are differences from them. Like, you could look at that in a positive sense. Homa's going to be able to putt better than Morikawa. Maybe that becomes a massive plus. And on the flip side of that, Morikawa is a better par 5 scorer than Max Homa is. So maybe that combination is what helps propel them up the board. But I think there's a lot of different ways to play this, obviously, just by giving that answer. It's like, do you want 2 guys that are exactly the same? Or do you want 2 guys that are polar opposites? And I think you can make an argument for either end of that, because it does work both ways. It's just, what market do you want to make that bet in? What is the matchup that you're looking at? Does it make sense from a value perspective? So those are a lot of the questions that you're going to have to ask yourself out there and figure out what you're comfortable doing.
I know you've only got about 5 minutes left of availability, but I wanted to ask, are there any teams that you're backing, that you want to back specifically in the best ball or the alternate shot, or to fade them in one or to back them in one? Are there any that grade out better for you? I know that you combine them into one team. I'm not sure how that played out in your model.
I mean, a lot of, like, the majority of my weight ended up coming from one team. I can tell you the teams, though, that would be, at least from a combination standpoint, so this would be an alternate shot answer, that my model did not like.
Okay.
So I think this is an intriguing one here, just because I've seen this from a DFS perspective, and I don't know if I trust these numbers. And, it's a weird tournament to try to gauge some of those answers. And we could talk about what that means from a betting perspective here. But your boy Luke Donald and Eduardo Molinari, I didn't necessarily see the intrigue that some other people in the space seem to be having on them at this point. Like, it's a great call on your point with Donald. I think he clearly has turned this around a little bit, but it didn't necessarily like them for the alternate shot format. It did have some concerns with Olesen and Højgaard. That's one of the reasons why I decided to take them on. I think one of the similar pairings that I didn't end up betting them, I couldn't really find an edge, but I think you can see a difference in pricing in some areas. Ben On and SH Kim, they were kind of similar in a lot of ways, where I thought they could make a really good alternate shot group with them. And I mean, I've seen them as low as 33 to 1 to win this. I think you can shop around and find a better number. I didn't find a way that I wanted to back them, but that was at least a name that or a group that I found interesting there. But I mean, I can't at this point anymore with Carl Yuan. So I'm not going to go
Oh,
down that direction with it. But him
we
and
don't speak
Tyson
of him anymore.
Alexander had something that looked fine together. But I'm going to ignore the urge. I'm going to pretend like I don't see him on the list here. And I'm just going to move forward as if he's not part of this tournament because it never works, Roberto.
Yeah, that train has left the station. Ben On, interesting player because throughout his career on the PGA Tour, he's been consistently one of the worst putters. And right now, he's like a little bit above average, which is got to feel like he's the best putter in the world. For him, his confidence got to be sky high. I think he's someone to keep an eye on in the next few weeks, as long as that putter stays lukewarm at least. Spencer, I know you got a roll. Where else can the people find you this week?
Yes, so as always, you can find me on Twitter at TOffSports. I will have an article tomorrow over at Action Network where I will cover this from hopefully a round one perspective. We will see what's out there in the space. I haven't seen any matchups yet that have caught my eye. We still have places that are releasing odds in the matchup sector there. So we'll see what ends up coming into play there. Obviously, you can find all my stuff over at Rotoball, or you can find my model over there and find all these numbers that I'm talking about. But once again, Roberto, I appreciate you doing the show with me. Everybody out there that does make us a part of their weekly research process. We can't thank you guys enough. Without you, that we wouldn't have a show here. So I wish everybody out there good luck. Probably not the best betting tournament at the end of the day, but look, I mean, we talked about a lot of wagers here in an event that you wouldn't think you could find too many. So I think that's like the answer when push comes to shove here. Value is value. And if you can price shop and when people, and that goes from either other people in the space or bookmakers, if there's anything that like a lazy price gets released, or there's just anything that pushes you in a direction where you can get an edge, that's what we're always trying to find here. So once again, we appreciate everyone who tunes into the show.
And make sure to check out who Spencer is fading, his big fades of the week. Don't bet on Matt Wallace when he's on Spencer's fade list. I learned that the hard way last week. He basically beat no one last week at Hilton Head. So that'll do it for today's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Links and Locks, presented by Bet365. For more great golf content from our Action Network team, check out our Best Bets episode from earlier this week featuring Golf Bet's Jason Sobel. Sobel's hot. He hit on John Rahm at the Masters, and the PGA Tour's Ben Everill as they quickly run down their top plays for this week's tournament. You can also catch the Gimme, which Jason Sobel will be on tomorrow. And be sure to check out actionnetwork.com and the Action Network app for all of our great golf betting and DFS content. Spencer's got an article coming out tomorrow. You can find us on Twitter. Spencer is at TOffSports. Nick is at SticksPicks. And I am at RobertoA213. You can find me on PGA Tour Live Stream 3 featured groups, where we're going to have, among others, Kurt Kitayama, Taylor Montgomery, Sungjae Im, as well as Kashmir Keith Mitchell. Thanks for tuning into our show. And thanks to everyone who makes this podcast possible, especially our producers, Noah, Sophia, and Matt. Thanks for tuning in. And here's to hoping you hit the green down in New Orleans this week.